to facilitate you all not having to follow along as I'm doing different demos. So I would encourage you to just sort of like watch, let it sort of wash over you, and maybe don't try to do the same thing as what I'm working on in the workshop at the same time. I'll be uploading the recording of this workshop to my lab's YouTube page. So you should be able to view it at any point in time if you want to work on and sort of stop and start any of the things that we're working on today. Okay, so let's get started. First of all, what is Qualtrics? So Qualtrics is online survey software, and it can present questionnaires, surveys, different kinds of online tasks. And Gallaudet now has a site license. And so for those of you who were previously using REDCap for this kind of survey administration or online data collection, Gallaudet is sort of transitioning over to Qualtrics. And one thing that's great about that site license is that it's free for the Gallaudet community. And so you can just sign in through the single sign-on function, so just using your Gallaudet credentials. And you can set up an account, and it's free for you to access. Okay. So what we're going to be going through today, first of all, is just accessing Qualtrics and creating a survey. So creating your first survey. We're going to go through some of the specifics of survey questions and some of the different types of survey questions. We're also going to go over what data output looks like. Because, of course, why are you using this survey if not to get data? And finally, we'll go over survey distribution. So how to send out your survey to other people or send out your task to other people. So this already is a bit of an ambitious agenda for the time that we have today. If we have time, we'll go into additional features like adding a video, which of course is very important for us at Gallaudet. If we want to add videos of signed questions to a survey, etc. You want to add a video of your signed consent form to your survey. We'll go over how to do that if we have time. And we'll also go over various levels of randomization, which is of course important for some data collection. So let's go ahead and get started. First of all, how do you access Qualtrics? You can go to gallaudet.qualtrics.com, and you're simply going to use your single sign-on credentials, which is your Gallaudet email address and password, in order to sign on. So simple, easy. First, we're going to go over the basic elements of creating a project. So what you're going to see in my slides today is basically a lot of screenshots, because when I think about sort of reviewing things for projects, I want to actually see what it looks like and where to click. So this is the first screen you'll see when you initially enter into Qualtrics. So there's sort of a dashboard, and you can see your account settings up here in the right corner. You'll have some recent projects. You can also click on all projects. And it lists a summary of what surveys or projects you have active. So what projects might be collecting data at that very point. So the first thing that you want to do when you create a project is click Create a New Project. Easy. Once you click that button, it's going to take you to a screen that looks like this. So when you're creating a project, it gives you various options. So there are some project templates that you can use, or you can create your own survey from scratch. Today, I'm going to show you what it looks like to create that survey or create that project from scratch. So first, you would click you would click indicating that you want to create a blank survey. And it gives you a little bit of a description for what that looks like. In order to actually get started, you would click the Get Started button over here on the right. Okay, so this is going to pop up a menu where it asks you to create a new project. And so you're going to give it a name. And in this case, it gives you some options in a drop-down menu for how you want to create that survey. And so the first one that we're going to go through is creating a blank survey project, where you're picking different types of questions and actually building the project yourself. There are also options like importing a QSF file, copying a survey from a previous project, or there is also a survey library, which has a number of different kinds of questionnaires. And so you can also use a survey from your library. Okay, so for this case, we're going to be creating a blank survey project. As I said before, there is also an option to import a survey or a project from a previously created QSF file. So what's a QSF file? If you're anything like me, that was not a file extension that I was previously familiar with. So a QSF file is a proprietary file type for Qualtrics. So only Qualtrics uses that file type. But basically, you can download and upload surveys with a single file. So all of the information that's contained within that project, all of the information that's contained within that survey or that project is within that specific file. So you can specifically choose a file on your computer to upload to start to create a new project. So in that case, you would choose your file from your computer. This can be particularly helpful if you want to, for example, share your survey on an open science data repository after you've finished collecting the data. It can also facilitate, sharing of tasks and things like that across different labs. Okay, but today we're going to be focusing on creating a blank project from scratch. Okay, so now we've gone through the basics of creating a survey. Now we're going to get into creating the survey itself and creating different survey questions. So the second point here. So we're going to be using the builder, which is how you create all of these questions, the different kinds of questions that you can create, and some important modifications for those questions. Okay, so first of all, the builder view is probably going to be where you spend the most time creating your survey. And so when you first come into the main page, as soon as you've created your blank survey template, it will bring you into the builder view. And so it's indicated that you're in the builder view through this little tab over here. And if you ever need to get back to it, you can always click this tab. So this is the main page and the main editing page where you're going to create and edit different questions and tasks. And so it looks like this. It has some question options. It has various different question blocks and the specific questions. So what is a question block? So a question block is a section of your survey or task. By default, a block will all appear on the same web page. So you can create multiple questions or multiple tasks within that web page. So for example, let's say in one question block, you have one survey, in another question block, you have another survey. So you may have multiple questions in each survey, but they all display on the same, those two blocks display on different pages. So you can think about blocks as sort of like the units of your survey or your task. Okay, within those blocks, you're going to create different questions or different elements within that block. So that's like an individual survey or a task or a question, and you can set up these individual questions within the blocks. So when you're setting up these individual questions or these individual elements within a block, you'll have the options to change these elements over here on the left. Okay, so when you're picking a question, or when you're sort of picking your next element to include in your survey, there's a drop-down menu to select different kinds of question types. And we'll go over a few of the ones that I happen to use most often, but I would encourage you to just play around with the different question types and kind of see what's available. Because there are a number of different question types that I'm not specifically going to cover in our workshop today, since this is meant to be kind of a beginner workshop to get you started. Okay. So the default question type that will pop up is a multiple choice question type. So as I've typed out here, this is a multiple choice question. This is kind of what that looks like. So it will give you a question statement and give you some options with that question. You can type in the question text and the response options in here. Over here on the left, you can see that there are various different options for how to change some of the elements for this question. In terms of the answers, you can allow one answer. So this is a more traditional multiple choice question where people are just picking one option and only one option. Or you can allow for multiple answers. So for example, using multiple different response options, having people click whatever options apply to them, so on and so forth. You can also change the number of choices. So here I have 5 options. You could have 2 options or 3 options. You can make these modifications to make the question fit for you. So that's the basics of the multiple choice questions. Okay. Similarly, there is also a matrix multiple choice question. So if you have multiple questions or statements that all use the same rating scale. So for example, this is a great option for a Likert scale questionnaire. So if you have people making ratings from one end of a scale to another, so for example, I've set it up here from strongly disagree to strongly agree. All of these questions would be using that same rating scale. And so can all be added to the same matrix. Similar to the previous question type, the multiple choice question type, it has similar settings. So in terms of the answer or the response that you can get from individuals, you can either allow only one answer or you can allow multiple answers. You can also change the number of statements and the number of response options. So for example, if you are using a previously developed survey, this can be a good option for setting up that survey in Qualtrics, because you have the instructions here at the top. You have your rating scale elements, and then you have the different statements that are in the questionnaire. So for example, in this statement, you might see, I am learning a lot from this workshop. You might select strongly agree or strongly disagree. You can use that same rating scale for a number of different statements. One thing I will caution you in terms of setting this up so that you get the best data, one thing I would encourage you to do is if you are using this kind of response format, one of the things that can happen is what we call straight lining responses, where people just select the same response over and over and over again and straight line their response all the way down the questionnaire, especially if it's a longer questionnaire. One thing you can do to kind of mitigate some of those responses when people are just bored or not giving you what we call real, what we think of as real data, is you can sort of reverse score some of your statements. So, for example, if I wanted to reverse this statement, I might say, I am not learning a lot from this workshop. And so having a few of those basically indicate along like similar dimensions basically allows you to set up how to assess some of these statements. So if all of your questions are about a similar topic, for example, so if I want to indicate that strongly agree for a lot of my different statements means that people are having a happy and enjoyable time at this workshop, I might include a couple statements in there that are like, I am not enjoying this workshop. That way I can see that if people are developing or expressing similar sentiments, they might pick the reverse option as opposed to that strongly agree option. And that just tells me that people have some natural variety of responses when they are answering questions related to the same topic. Okay, so that's a matrix option. You can also use options that basically just present a text or a graphic. So this text graphic question option actually doesn't really have an option for a response. So what this is doing is it's used for presenting text, presenting instructions. You can show pictures or videos, but in this particular text graphic option, people actually aren't going to be giving a response associated with that question type. So there's no option for somebody to like click and respond. It's basically there to present information such as text or graphics or a movie. Again, over here on the left, there are a few different options for what those formats look like. So if you know you want to present a picture, you can select graphic. Or if you know that you're just presenting instructions, you can just type in that text. And later on, we'll cover a little bit of how to insert a video in this kind of question. Okay. There is also a text entry question. So why would you use this particular question type? So when you want participants to physically type in a response, they can type in words, sentences. I've actually used this to have participants like submit little essays in the past. So pretty much any response where you want people to type in a response, you can use this text entry option. In terms of the size of the box on the page, it starts pretty small, but you can modify the box size by dragging the corner of the box, this right corner down here. And the options for response box length are over here on the left. So if you want to kind of limit the amount that people are typing into the box, you can have a single line, people can type in multiple lines, they can write you a small novel. For this next question, it's actually not really a question at all. So again, this timing question type does not actually record a response that a participant like clicks, for example. So this question, as it says here, lets you record and manage how long a participant spends on a page. So this question isn't actually displayed to the participant. So for example, if you want a screen to appear to the participant or the respondent for a certain amount of time. So let's say you want them to spend at least 20 minutes on that screen, or I'm sorry, 20 seconds on that screen while they read a particular statement. So you can delay going to the next screen for 20 seconds. So in other words, participant will actually not have the option to advance to the next screen until that amount of time has passed. On the flip side, if you want to limit the amount of time that a particular screen displays to your respondent, so let's say you only want to show a picture for 5 seconds, and then you want it to automatically advance to the next page of your survey. You can also use the auto advance option to go to the next screen after a certain amount of time. So this allows you to control how long particular pieces of information are displayed to the respondent. So some more important features: understanding how to edit your questions. So if you want to edit content in your questions, if you mouse over a particular question, you will see these boxes pop up at the top of the box. Over here on the left, if you click Rich Content Editor, it will open additional editing options. So it gives you a more robust text editing option as opposed to just typing it in. That Rich Content Editor looks like this. So you have some additional options for formatting. You can add some additional elements to the text. You can edit the underlying HTML. And there are some other additional options. Some other nuts and bolts for creating these question types. So one, you can copy a question. So if you have similar questions and you need to create a number of them, you can copy it by selecting these 3 dots over in the corner. That opens up a drop-down menu that gives you a number of different options here. So similarly, if you want to copy a question or move a question around, you would click these 3 dots. So when I first introduced the question blocks in the individual questions, I told you that within a specific block or within a specific section of your survey, the default is that everything displays on the same page. But what if you don't want all of the questions in that one section to display on the same page? So you would insert what's called a page break. So let's say you have 5 questions. You want the first 2 to display on the first page. You want the second 2 to display on the second page. And then that final question gets a page all to itself. So by adding a page break, if you want questions to appear on different pages, you would click Add a Page Break. It then looks like this in the survey builder. So it indicates that there's a page break in between the questions. And basically, this just tells you that particular questions or elements are going to display on one page or another to your participant or respondent. Okay. One last important element. When you create a new question, the questions by default are just given an automatic number. So it'll be question 2, question 46. As you're thinking about how to set up your survey and how to think about and look at the survey output, I would strongly encourage you to edit your question numbers. So you can do that basically by clicking or double clicking on the actual question number itself. And then you can type in a question number or whatever you want that question to be named. Part of the reason why this is important is that when you're looking at your data output, it may not necessarily be clear to you what question Q247 is. But if you give it a sensible or consistent name, it will make looking at your data output much, much easier. Okay. So at this point, I am going to switch over to actually show you how to do this. So we've gone through some of the slides. And at this point, I'm actually going to show you what it looks like in real time to actually create a survey in Qualtrics. So can everybody still see my screen? Switch. Ready? So basically, I'm going to go through the same process that we just went through in the slides, but now we're going to do it in real time. Okay, so this is the initial Qualtrics page. I don't currently have any active surveys, but I have a couple of different surveys that I've worked on recently. So I'm going to start by creating a new project. So I want to create this project from scratch. So I'll select a from scratch survey. Here, we're going to get started. We're giving it a name, and we're going to create a blank survey project. So now we have a brand new survey called Qualtrics Demo Live. So again, this is what the initial builder view looks like. We have the first question block. We have, by default, our first question. We can switch between the builder view and other different survey elements over here on the left. And there are some tabs at the top, such as data analysis and data reports, which I'll get into in just a minute. Okay, so this is the first question. By default, it's a multiple choice question. So I can click and edit the text. In addition, I can also edit the responses. So I can add or delete choices. I can allow multiple answers. So you can see now that people can just click multiple options. I can also use suggested choices for these response options. So there are some suggested choices, true, false. You can play around with these. Okay. So now we want to add maybe our next question. So now we have a second question within that same block. So if I were to show my study right now, both of these questions, these two questions, would display to the participant on the same page. So this time, I want to pick a different response, a different question type. So this time, I want to pick a matrix question type. So again, I would write the instructions at the top. So let's say I have a couple statements. I like this workshop. I dislike this workshop. Let's say I wanted to use suggested statements. So for the scale points, I could have agree or strongly disagree. Or I could have them rate on a 1 to 3 scale. Okay. So for our next question, I can pick text or graphic display. So again, you can see that there's no response option here. This is only for presenting instructions or a movie or a graphic. If I wanted to edit this text more specifically, I would click in the question and click Rich Content Editor. This gives me a whole bunch of editing options, including the font, the size. I can make things bold. In order to exit out of this editor, you just click outside the box. Okay. And our final question type that I would add, so you can either click the plus sign to add a new question or add a new question here. So I would scroll down for the question types, and this time I want to add timing. So again, this question lets me modify how long a particular screen is displayed to a participant. So if I want to delay how long a particular person needs to wait before advancing, I would pick delay showing submit button. If I wanted to auto advance, so if I wanted to move on after a certain period of time, I would choose this option. And it also has an option to show the timer. Okay, so those are our different question types. Let's say, for example, I wanted to copy this text graphic question. So I would click the 3 dots on the right, and I could copy that question. Let's say I want to move the timer. It will give me some options for where to do that. So I can move it to, let's say, the top of the block. Okay. I could also, for example, add a page break after question 2. So if I want questions 1 and 2, and 3 and 5 to display on different pages, I would click add a page break. And now these will display on different pages to the participant, even though they're still within the same block. Okay, so again, I made the point about changing and modifying your question names. So this automatically numbered as question 4. To edit, I would click. And maybe change it to something like block 1 timing. In the output, this would let me know that this is a timing question. All right, so we've gone through the first elements of creating and editing questions. So I want to pause at this point here and see if there are any specific questions. Do we have any questions from the audience that I can answer at this point? You can either type into the chat, or if you want to come up, we can answer your question. Any questions so far?
No questions? Okay.
So next, I'm going to switch back over to my presentation, and I'm going to show you some of the elements of data output. Okay. Can everybody still see my screen? Great. Okay. So again, we're back in our builder view. And ultimately, the reason why we create these surveys and create these tasks is to get data, right? So this is one of the most important points of knowing and understanding Qualtrics, is actually how to access your data and what that data is going to look like. So in the Data and Analysis tab, you can download the raw data. You can review specific questions. And you can review responses in progress. So first, if you want to export your raw data, you can download that raw data in various different formats. So clicking at the top, you would pick the Data and Analysis tab. And in this drop-down menu, you would click Export Data. If you're doing any kind of data analysis, this is my personal bias here, I would strongly recommend maybe not using Qualtrics built-in functions and analyzing and understanding the responses yourself. So downloading that raw data and using that for your data analysis. Okay. There are a couple different ways to download your data. So in these boxes here, there are various different versions of how you can download your data. And depending on whatever format is your preferred measure, you can pick that one. So here I want to point out that there are a couple different ways that you can download your raw data. The first of which is actually using the numeric values in the data. So if you set up a Likert scale from 1 to 5, it would download those numeric responses. Again, if you had a Likert scale from strongly disagree to strongly agree with a 5-point scale, you can also use the choice text. And when that downloads, it will display agree, strongly agree, basically the typed out response options. For data tracking and archival purposes, I would strongly suggest that you actually download both, just in case 5 years down the road, you need to check in for what number lines up with what response. Okay. So when we look at output of what Qualtrics gives to us, this is an example of an output file opened up in Excel. So this particular example is outputting the response text. So you can see each row represents a participant. Each column represents a question. And so all of these boxes indicate the responses that were picked by that particular person for that question. So this was a Likert scale from, I think, strongly disagree to strongly agree. If I wanted to choose the numeric values, this would display numbers instead. Okay, so this is why I stressed the importance of creating question labels that make sense. So there are a number of different other columns, and I specifically have named these questions to correspond to the question numbers for a specific questionnaire. For example, if I had just left them to default question numbers, it might be the case that I have Q57, Q84, depending on the order with which I added these questions. So, strong suggestion to think about what your data output is going to look like when you're creating those question labels. Do your future self a favor and make sure these things make sense. Okay. Qualtrics also has something called a data report. So at the tabs at the top, you can click reports. And you can create these summary tables or graphics for specific questions.
Okay, we're going to switch interpreters. I'm going to pin Jeremy. Remove mine. Thank you.
Okay, so you can pick your questions to include from your survey. And the report will automatically display responses in graphs or tables. And you can pick how those look. So for example, in the survey that I gave many of you to register for this workshop, these are actually the responses. So this was a question asking what topics people would like to learn about. And these are the number of responses. Okay. And the responses are automatically summarized in these reports. Okay. So at this point, I'm going to transition back and show you what those data look like. Okay. So here I want to go to the Data and Analysis tab. And in this option, you can display specific questions. So I can add a question here from the survey. And it would display the responses here. And I can go through and see what those look like. I can export my data. So I would click export. So let's say here, I want to look at the numeric values for the responses that people have picked. It also tells you when the data was last downloaded. Sometimes if you're dealing with data sets that are particularly large, this can take a minute or two. It automatically downloads in a zipped file. And through TV magic, it looks like something like this. So again, each line is a person. So each line is a respondent. And each column is a different question. Okay. In addition, I'm also going to show you the data reports. So this is an example of a data report. Added the question, and it's automatically summarized the response. I can also look at graphs, which are automatically generated based on the responses that are in the data set. Okay. In the interest of time, I'm actually not going to switch back to my slides at this point, and I'm just going to show you how to distribute your data. There are also slides summarizing this process that I will distribute to you all. So first, I want to make one important point. Going back to our survey, in order to actually be able to distribute your survey, you need to finalize it and publish it. And this is also true anytime you make changes to your survey. So let's say, for example, I wanted to add a question here. Now I've made a change to this survey, and I would need to publish it for those changes to go through. I can also preview the survey before it goes out. So this might look familiar to you all. So it shows you the web page version and shows you what it looks like on a mobile device. Back to survey. Now to distribute, now that I've published it and it's ready to go, I've finalized it, I want to show it to participants. In order to distribute the web link, I click anonymous link. And so it generates a unique link to your survey. And so you can copy this link, use it for whatever you need to use it. Another option is also using the QR code. So for example, if you want people to be able to access your survey just by snapping a QR code on a flyer, you can use this automatically generated QR code. Okay, so that is our beginner introduction to Qualtrics. I have additional data that's included in the slides. So for example, an instruction for how to insert videos and how to use various different randomization functions. If I have more interest in doing this kind of workshop again, I'm happy to have more intermediate or advanced options that I present, but just know that those are in the slides. Okay, I'm gonna stop sharing at this point. Okay, I'd like to take some questions for the last couple minutes. I see a question from Athena. Is it possible to download the data set in long format? Unfortunately, I don't think so. I think it's only available in that wide format. Okay. Does anybody have any other questions about what we've covered today? Is there a way to filter out spammy responses? Okay. Filtering out spammy responses or straight lining. So one, spammy responses, there's a question type that is a CAPTCHA, like I'm not a robot response. And so you can add that to your question library. Otherwise, in terms of ensuring data quality, one of the things that I do when I look at response data is basically for all respondents for a particular questionnaire or things like that, using the raw data, I will look at an average standard deviation of responses. And then I will compute a standard deviation of responses for each individual person. So this is on the back end, basically like filtering out your data once you have your data. And so what this does is basically, if people have a normal amount of responses across all of your questions, they'll have a normal amount of deviation across mean questions, right? And so If people have a very, very small amount of deviation across questions, across the responses they've made, that will show up in the standard deviation of their average responses. So for example, if people are responding to a Likert scale, especially if these are different questions and maybe some of those are reverse scored, they'll have a normal amount of variation in their responses. If somebody is just straight lining responses and picking the same thing all the way down, they're going to have an abnormally small amount of standard deviation from their responses. So that's one of the ways I do it. Okay. All right. So if anybody has maybe one last question, we need to wrap up at this point. One of our interpreters had to leave for their next job. Can surveys be shared to the library? Yes. I think there is a Gallaudet level library which you can share different surveys to. And you will also have like your personal library of surveys as well. And you can copy questions or insert questions from one survey project to another. Okay. Any last questions? All right. Thank you all so much for your time and attention today, and for your willingness to get started with this new survey software. I will send out a copy of my slides, a link to this recording, and I'm always happy to help answer questions as well. And if you would like to know about more advanced options in Qualtrics, or would like sort of more intermediate advanced options in a workshop in the future, let me know about it. And I would be happy to do this again. All right. Thank you all. Have a wonderful Friday. See you soon.